so we decided we'd rather come to Boise than go to any of the other places. It wasn't quite as far away from home as the others, and we just figured we would like to do that, and we knew he would have an LDS boss. So we came to Boise, and we got involved in Boise Little Theater. He moved up in his job, and was about ready to move on to a bigger station when we had Boise Little Theater fire, and he was killed. And I was 4 months along with Rick there. So I went back to live with Mother and Daddy, and till after Rick was born, and was still living there and getting to the point where I thought I needed to get a home of our own, because he needed a home of his own too, and we needed to be on our own, and started dating after a while, which was not easy to do at first, but I did after a while, and then we had a mutual friend that wanted to get Reid and I together. And so they kept trying to get me to come back to Boise. They wanted me to come back to some special program they were going to have in the ward. And I couldn't come because my Aunt Eldine died at the time, but they kept after me. And so I came up and met Reid, and I think we talked about that last time, didn't we?
Yeah, that's where we left. That's where we started last time.
So that takes me up through those years. Now, do you want to?
How long did you work at the primary children's hospital?
I was there for 3 years,
Just
and
3
I
years.
was a head nurse.
But that was the longest you were at any of the hospitals?
Well, I was at the D hospital for my 3 years training plus some more time, because I worked at the D hospital for a little while after I finished training, and then I worked at the D hospital after I graduated from the University of Utah until I was married.
And that's the hospital that was right across the corner from Grandpa
That was
Grandma.
across any corner from their home
One's
there,
not there anymore.
Capitol and Harrison. So, but the primary hospital was my favorite place. I loved the work with the children, pediatrics. The children all called me Mama Craycroft. And then we had a lot of fun experiences as well as some kind of sad experiences. But I got very close to the people that I worked with, and got very close to many of the children that I worked with, and I still get a Christmas card from one of them's parents every year.
Oh, wow.
And it's been, 40 years since I was there about. So it was a very, very good experience to work there.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's hear your words.
You want to hear about my war experience?
Yes, I
Okay.
do.
Let's start at the same place, December 7th, 1941. Where were you?
The reason I asked Mom that is because I was at the University of Idaho in 1941, and I was a senior at the university. And when the war had broken out a couple of years before over in Europe, and we weren't very interested in going to war, I mean our country. Britain was just about gone, France was gone, all of the other Balkan countries were gone, Holland and Belgium had all gone down. Mussolini had joined up with, he was the dictator of Italy, and he joined up with Hitler, I think partly because he didn't want to be gone too. He thought he'd better join him rather than be conquered. And they'd gone down and taken over all of North Africa, so they had really spread out. Britain was their last holdout, and they were desperate to get us in the war. They were just about out of it. In other words, they were bombing Britain night and day, and it was bad. But we just didn't want to get involved in the war. But when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, it was on a Sunday morning, and we got the news. Came out on the radio.
Why did they do that? Were they thinking they wanted to take over the United States?
Uh-oh, you
when
got
they-
it straight.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's not on schedule now.
It's okay.
Were they thinking they were going to conquer the United States?
Yeah.
Or
Oh yeah, that was the idea.
Are you serious?
They had world conquest in mind.
They thought that if
Derek,
they thought they would. They thought that they would
And so when they
sign
figured
the
that
peace treaty in Washington.
You mean they signed the peace treaty and
That's
then...
what the Japanese thought. The Japanese thought that they would sign the peace treaty in Washington after they had forced the United States to surrender.
Really?
It was really scary.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, the Japanese decided that they were going to get into the war, and so they surprised us, presumably, at Pearl Harbor, and they almost destroyed our complete navy that was in Pearl Harbor. They knew about that. See, they had spies over there, and we lost a lot of manpower and a lot of ships, and were very poorly prepared. We didn't have good airplanes. They were not updated. We didn't have a good army. We didn't have much left of our navy. We were in bad shape. We had troops over in the Philippines. MacArthur was in charge of those troops over there. And anyway, at the university, get back where we all were required to take ROTC. So when I was a freshman and a sophomore, I had taken
ROTC.
Reserve Officers Training Corps.
Oh.
So we'd had 2 years of military training as part of our schooling. The ones that wanted to be officers continued and took the junior and senior year as to become officers when they graduated, if they so chose.
Did the government pay for part of your schooling for taking that
No.
training? No, huh?
Mm-mm.
Huh?
I think they do
It was a
now.
required course.
Huh.
Anyway, I decided that I wanted to be other than an officer in the Army, and of course that's before the war started. So we had a draft that had started a couple of years before that, and we each got a number.
Mm-hmm.
Then they put these little capsules and drew them out, and the way that the numbers were drawn out determined when you went into the service.
So it was not, the drawing was not based on whether you were single or married
No.
or age or that age, just good luck then.
Good luck or bad luck, yeah, or whatever.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, at the rate they were taking, we had no training camps to speak of that were extra, so they had to build training camps and everything. So they could only take so many into the service each month. And so it was a kind of a rapid growth program in the Army.
Uh-huh.
I don't think we had much over 1 million or 1.5 million men at that time. And when the war was over, we had over 11 million in our
Oh.
armed forces.
Goodness.
So
I
you
read-
see how fast.
I read 14. It was 150,000 men in the United States Army at the beginning of the war,
At the beginning of the war.
and 9 million men in the United States Army at the end of the war, and total armed services for the United States at the end of the war were 14 million.
14 million?
14 million.
You can see where all the
1/10
men
of the
went, you see.
1/10 of the population of the country was in the military.
Well, it was a mad scramble. The women worked at the plant. Anyway, to get back to my life, before nightfall, we all had rifles on our shoulder, and we were marching around the campus in our uniforms. We were all shook up. That day, President Roosevelt declared war, and the next day, the Congress voted that we were officially going to declare war on the Axis powers, which was Germany, Italy, and Japan. At the rate they were taking on soldiers, drafting, my number was to come up the following August, which was 8 months later.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to finish my schooling.
Oh.
And when I got out, not knowing whether I would be drafted or not for sure, because I did have glasses, and at that time they weren't, you had to be pretty well physically fit, glasses included. But so I got a graduate fellowship to do graduate work and get my master's degree. So I worked on that during that summer. And at that time, during that time, from about January on, I started going with Theo Jensen, and we were going pretty steady all during that time until I was drafted in August. So I got
It's 1942.
in 1942. So I got.
What was your degree there?
I graduated in agriculture, in poultry and dairy science.
Oh.
So I went to Salt Lake City to, what's that camp down there? Camp,
Williams?
no, right in Salt Lake
No,
City. That's where
it's
I was.
not there anymore.
I just
Good
heard
grief,
the
I never, thought I'd never forget that.
I heard the door open.
Anyway, I went. There was an army training
Base.
station there in Salt Lake. And
Douglas.
what?
Camp Douglas.
Douglas, Fort Douglas, Utah. And so I went there, and we took our exams, and
You
3
mean
days.
physical?
No, we had to take our physical before. I passed my physical with flying colors.
So what type of exam?
Well, the exams was the Army exam and all the shots that you had to take, you know. I passed my exam as a civilian, then in the Army they give you another exam, and then they give you shots. We had all these different shots, and we got them all at one time, and I was really lightheaded for a while. You know, they shoot you both arms and every place else.
Well, we had to go through that too.
Well, that's
We
okay.
had to take exams and go
I
through
had
the
to-
shots.
I had
and
to,
train.
I took the test when I just felt woozy. But anyway, the next thing that happened is that I was sent 3 days later to a place called Camp Grant, Illinois, which was a basic training camp. And so I went through basic training in Camp Grant, Illinois. After 6 weeks, we were kind of sorted out, and I was picked to go to Fort Harrison, Indiana, to go to a laboratory technician school for to be a lab technician in a hospital. Because of my training in college,
Yeah.
I'd had a lot of science training, and bacteriology and chemistry and things like that. So we took the wonder course in 90 days down there, and they picked 6 of us out of the class to stay as instructors, and I was one of those 6. So I stayed there for another 3 months as an instructor, and then was sent to Camp Shenango in Pennsylvania. That was an overseas center where we concentrated troops. And as quick as they could get ships and places to send troops, they'd come by the day practically and take train loads or truckloads or whatever of troops to the various ports to ship overseas. Well, I was there for about 3 or 4 months. One time we went for 30 days up to Boston to a camp up there because we were supposed to go out on hospital ships. But they kept starting on the A's when they went down the roll, and they'd get down to about the L's and just start on the M's, and they'd have all the men they wanted. So after 3 or 4 times of that, after 30 days, they sent me back to Camp Shenango again. So it was about in the middle of the summer sometime that we had a call, and they got clear down into the M's, and my name came up. And there was a staff sergeant, Owens. He was an old timer, and he was in this same replacement depot. And he begged me. He says, "Please," he says, "I've been here as long as you have, and I want to go back. I want to go overseas." I says, "Nothing doing. I'm going. If my name came up, I'm going overseas." So I got to go overseas. So we went to over to Virginia. Newport News was a deportation port, and got on a Liberty ship, about a 6,000-ton ship, real small. It's one of the many ships that they made for wartime use. They were quickly made and poorly put together, but they did the job, and they carried cargo. And then they put the canvas and the boards over the cargo, and then they'd put bunks on each side, and that was our trip overseas.
Huh.
So there was 99 other ships in this convoy. And so we went over as a convoy, and we had destroyer escorts kind of going around with us because there were a lot of German submarines out, you know, shooting. There were a lot of cargo ships that never made it, or other kind of ships.
But
Because
soldiers?
well, yeah, the Germans, if they could sink the ships in, they didn't have to fight you when they got over on the other side. And they had a terrifically large submarine group. In other words, they had lots, thousands of submarines. So anyway, we went over there, and that was my first experience of seeing one of these hurricane storms. We went right through the middle of one of them. And
The ocean?
on the ocean, yeah. And those waves were so high, they'd come up and go right over the top of the ship, and the ship would just bounce around like a cork. That lasted for 3 days.
Oh.
When we got through, we couldn't, all 100 ships were lost. Nobody knew where they were. It took 3 more days to get us all collected. I'm glad that the waves were so high the submarines couldn't aim at us, you know.
Uh-huh.
We finally got back and it took 23 days to go over to Casablanca, Africa, North Africa, in Morocco. So we finally got over there, and you know, when we came up on that land after 23 days, we'd all been seasick, of course. When we got up and saw that city from the distance, it looked like a white city. All of the buildings in there looked white. Well, we landed, and they got us right out, and
Because of snow or what?
no, they were just
Buildings
made out
are
of
white.
white stone.
Oh.
White stone, yeah.
Casablanca.
Is that why they're called Casablanca then?
That
I
means
don't know
White
they-
House.
They what?
Casablanca means White House.
In
White
Spanish.
House. Well, the whole city was white.
Oh.
There was a new section and an old section. The old section wasn't quite so white when you got close. It was kind of dirty white, but the new section was pretty white. Anyway, we got on trucks and went right on through Casablanca and into a tent city out there, and we were to wait there until we got further orders. There was still a little fighting going on in North Africa.
About what time was this?
This was in August of 1942 and 1st of September, along in there.
43 or 42 or 43?
42. 1942.
You were drafted in 42.
I was drafted in 42. It's 1943,
43.
yeah. That's right, Rick. And while we were there, it was boring to stick around those camps. Incidentally, all the soil around there was red. And so the dust was red. So we all got kind of red when the wind blew. Anyway, they said, we need 10 volunteers to go down and work on the dock. I was bored sitting there, so I was one of the first volunteers, and we got 10 of us, got in the truck and went down to work on the docks. Well, we had sent over literally, I don't know how many, 20 or 30 or 40 in this dock right there of these forklifts like we've got over there. And you know how many they were using to unload those ships? None. They either had flat tires or dead batteries, and most of those Arabs didn't know how to run them anyhow. So us guys, none of us were much mechanics, but we got together and we figured out how to get some of the batteries charged, and we got some of the tires fixed, and we got quite a few of them out there. But it didn't do us much good because the guys who were unloading the ships wouldn't unload the ships with them. So they were unloading them the old-fashioned way. They'd have derricks, and they'd put all this stuff out in nets, you see, and then they'd lift the net up, and then they'd all haul the stuff over to the various places and put it on the trucks or whatever to haul it away. They had 400 or 500 Arabs there doing the work that a couple of 2 or 3 dozen stevedores could do the same amount of work. But when it came time to go home, all these Arabs, and they were all in their native clothing with their what they call a doitis. That was a big gown that went clear to the floor, and all the clothes they owned was underneath. You know, it was hot. In August, it was real hot over there. That was okay. I guess if they set their clothes down, somebody would steal them. But they'd all have to be checked when they went out, and my gosh, they had piles of stuff these guys had hid, and they pile of all the goods, sugar and everything, were all piled up here at the gates. Took them away from these. Then after it was dark, the Arabs would come back, and the guards would sell the stuff to the Arabs. It was quite a deal. In the middle of the day, one thing I noticed in Casablanca and all of those African cities, in the middle of the day was siesta time. And they just took time off, and if wherever they were, they just laid down and went to sleep. Yeah, all over the streets were loaded with people. It was okay for a couple hours, and then they'd get up. It was hot, see. Go to work again. We were over there when they had their I don't remember what they called it now, but it was the fast. They had a 30-day period of time, I think it was 30 days, where they fasted from daylight until dark. No water, no food. So they weren't working as hard as normal. And then they'd have their prayers at night and have their food at night. And we were over there, that's when we got over there, during that period of time. Finally we got, they decided they needed us over in Italy. They had invaded Sicily and captured Sicily. And They had gone
I
in.
thought they were allies.
Who?
Italy with Germany.
Italy was with Germany.
So who
The
had-
Allies had
Oh, the
invaded.
Allies had invaded Europe.
We were on Britain's
Mhm.
team. Us and Britain,
Mm-hmm.
basically. And so anyway, they had kind of got North Africa captured, so we went across on one of these little narrow gauge railways across North Africa at about 5 miles an hour. And it took us 3 days to go from Casablanca over to Tunis, which is where we got on an LCI, which is a infantry landing craft, and away we went across and got caught in another one of those big storms. And we had, in both cases, we had guys that had broken legs and broken arms. They couldn't hold on. Those boats just bounced around.
Mm-hmm.
We finally went into the harbor of Naples. There were ships that were sunk all over that Naples harbor. You could hardly get in because of the sunken ships in there because of the war. And then we bivouacked in a big athletic area. I don't know whether it was I think it was probably a big soccer field. And that's where we were bivouacked. And of course the Germans were bombing every night too. They come over and bomb because we had just captured Naples. And I found out there that I was assigned to the 94th Evacuation Hospital as a lab technician. So the next day I went up about 20 miles in a truck and joined my unit. That was, I think, in October, last part of October, 1943. And so we went right up. See, an evacuation hospital is a tent hospital. And we usually located between the 240 millimeter cannons and the 105, right in between there. And then, of course, the 240s would shoot their shells over, and the 105s would be right in front of us, you see. And then the trucks would come back with their wounded and stuff like that, and all of the infantry trucks and or whatever would go on up and then bivouac up out in front of the 105s to be on the front lines. So we were right there to collect the injured when they got shot, you know. We had men that to go out, you know, work, and pick up the men and put them in the ambulances, bring them back to our hospital. Well, we slowly worked up our way to toward Caserta, and captured Caserta, which was a place where there was a big castle, an Italian castle up there, and we went on up further till we come to a big mountain called Casino. I think that the town was Casino, and I've forgotten the name of the mountain. And they were entrenched there, and we just couldn't make it. And there were several other towns around, and as hard as we tried, we couldn't make it. We crossed a river and got across the river. That was a job. So finally, they decided that it was useless to try to go because they were so well fortified. So they called on the Air Force, and one day we were sitting about 8 miles from the town of Casino, where the Germans had the town, see. So somewhere between there was the front line. So we watched 2,500 B-17s and B-24s drop bombs on that town from daylight till dark. And it absolutely destroyed the town. It blew it kingdom come. So then the Germans took off and ran up the mountain. So we sent our bulldozers and our tanks and everything up there to get all of the rocks and the buildings all scraped off the road so we could get our trucks in there and get going with our ammo and stuff. By the time we got that done, the Germans were back and they recaptured the town.
Oh.
So we redid our forces, and we got told one night that we were to pack up instantly and we were going to go back to Naples. So we got back to Naples that same night and rolled all our tents up. We had 30 tents, I think it was, of these big long tents. All our equipment, we put them on trucks. They told us we were going to go in on the Anzio beachhead. So they had started the Anzio beachhead 3 days before. And the Germans, there was many Germans around there. That was a rest area for them. It's about 40 or 50 miles south of Rome. But,
just north of the casino, it was about what?
It was just on the other side of the mountain from Casino. But we couldn't get across the mountain, so we went around and came back in. They didn't expect us, so all they had was a few Germans that were at the back there on rest, you know, quite a few, but they weren't prepared to fight.
Mhm.
So they got captured or ran, whichever. How's our time coming?
Go ahead and take as much as you want.
Well, anyway, they had a field hospital in that area, but the Germans came in 3 days later. They had 8 divisions that surrounded this Anzio beachhead, and they bombed that hospital right out of existence. They just destroyed it. So then we were the ones to go and take their place. So we got on an LST along with a whole load of trucks that were loaded with ammunition, and we went around during the night time. And in the morning, just as it got light, we came in the harbor. It wasn't a long trip, you know, just during the night, about 30 or 40 miles. That's about all, you know. And the Germans had all their guns zeroed in on this harbor, and they were shooting at us all over the place with their big cannons, you know. Well, I'll tell you, when they dropped that front, an LST, it drops the whole front down, and the trucks go off, and the guys go off as fast as you can run. And well, I'll tell you, we all probably ran. So
Did you have red crosses on your vehicles or whatever? You know how they show in the movies, and
Good.
they don't
oh
get.
yeah, but when we were right mixed in with the ammunition trucks, we were
Oh.
gained. I mean, we weren't supposed to be mixed in with ammunition trucks, but we were. See.
Oh.
So anyway,
Depends what the field
we
is.
all ran off. And boy, when those trucks got off, and we could get out and run. I bet you never saw such a bunch of fast runners. we ran clear through the town of Anzio and on out. And we were all so dog tired we didn't know what to do. But those shells were coming in. If any one of those shells had hit that ship, it had blown the whole harbor apart, you know. Because one truck would blow up 10 others, you know.
That was one of the most dangerous beach
Yeah, I know
during the
history
whole
of it.
war.
Anyway, we finally got slowed down to a walk, and about 3 miles later, we got to where we were going to set up our camp and our hospital, and it was kind of on a little sand knoll, and there was a little kind of a swamp right there, and over on the other side, about 100 yards away, was where that hospital had been bombed out, just about 2 days or a day before. So we set up our tents, but we had bulldozers. They had bulldozers that they had on that. So they dug these big trenches about 4 feet deep and just as wide as our tents, our big long tents. And we put the tents flaps over the side of the dirt that we piled out there so that we would kind of be buried, so that the shells would have to be a direct hit before it would kill us, you know.
Yeah.
If it hit over here, then when it explodes, it usually goes kind of up, you know. So anyway, we got all our tents set up. We were ready to receive about 6 or 8 hours after we got there, and it's a good thing we had lots of casualties. Well, we were on the Anzio beachhead for 3 months, and we never had missed a night or a day that we didn't have air raids and shelling. And they had a big railroad gun that was in a tunnel that was between us and Rome, that they'd wheel that out and shoot these big, great big, huge 1.5-ton shells out into our area all the time. And we could hear those things whining over, and they'd do it all day and night. And the air raids would be all night. But there was some beautiful things about it. At night, when the air raids came over, and they never missed a night, our anti-aircraft had tracer bullets, so they could tell where their bullets were going. And it was like the 4th of July. So we'd get out, we'd sit underneath the water. We had a canvas water tank. We'd sit under that so that the shrapnel that came running, you know, when shells go up and explode, that something comes down. So that they'd come down and they'd fall in the water tank and not come down and kill us. So we finally, we had so many casualties there. They had mined that, the Germans had mined that place so extensively that we sent patrols out to see what was going on, and we'd get a whole bunch of casualties every morning with their legs blown off, their arms blown off, their heads, jaws blown off, you know, from mines. So we'd start getting them about 3 or 4 o'clock every morning for 90 days. Finally, we got enough ammunition tanks and everything moved up there in that period that we had enough going to be able to break out. So the big day came, you know, at dawn we were gonna break out. So we started, and boy, we had lots of casualties, but we broke through their lines, headed for Rome. And about 2 or 3 days, I don't remember the time, 2 or 3 days later, when we finally got it moving, we packed up our tents and away we went. Of course, once we got the Germans going, there was no place for them to stop and set up till they got on the other side of Rome. And Rome had been declared an open city. We were supposed to destroy Rome. So there wasn't any big shelling going on in Rome. So we went clear on up that period, saw that great big railroad gun. They had destroyed it when we got out. And that was a huge thing. That thing, you could crawl right in that barrel almost easily on your hands and knees and go the full length of that thing. It was a long gun. Anyway, we went up and we sat up in a hospital in Rome. And it was called the Hospital Louis Pasteur. Biggest hospital in Rome. And we only used a small part of it. It was a huge building. And the Germans had used that just the day before. And they were still German. They were still getting Germans out of the yard when we got in there. They were shooting. War was going on outside while we were sitting up inside.
Oh.
But we sat up in there. We received our wounded in there for, I believe, about a week or 10 days. Then we moved on up and got back into our tents and away we went again. And we slowly went up through the various towns of Italy all summer. I remember so many different experiences. Some of them weren't very funny, but we were bivouacked in an area that had been heavily mined, and they had taken 3 truckloads of mines out of this 3-acre field, which was how much we needed to set up our tents. So we went in to set up our tents.
These were just hospital tents?
Just our hospital.
You needed 3 acres?
3 acres, yeah. We had a big hospital. We could take 800 patients all at one time. That's more than both St. Luke's and St. Al's can take together. But we didn't have the facilities they had. You can imagine we had cots for beds and dirt for a floor. Our surgery, we put canvas down over that and give us a no dirt floor. You know? Remember, we were set up there one day. One of our tanks was coming back because it had been damaged and they couldn't go stay up on the front line. But it was good enough that they were going back, and the Germans had a reconnaissance plane going over, just like a little Piper Cub, you know, the reconnaissance planes were small, and they'd fly low, take pictures, and radio back what they could see, and then of course they radio back to the artillery, German artillery, and then they'd shoot shells over and knock the deal out. So this gunner, he thought he was going to do a little practice work, so he got his gun and turned it around, a turret gun, and he shot at this plane. It was quite low. And he hit it, and down it came, and it went right in the middle of a minefield just across the street. And it still said mining, you know, on the sign, but he couldn't see the sign, and so our guys went out and says, "Don't move, it's a minefield." Well, he couldn't understand English, so he got up and started running, and he got blown up, of course. And I remember one time we were watching a Spitfire and a Messerschmitt, a British and a German plane, doing a dogfight way up, you know. And there's 4 of us. We were right out of the edge of our hospital tents. And there's 4 of us standing there watching that. It was way up there. My gosh, it must have been a 1.5 miles or more up there. Pretty soon the guy that was next to me slumped down, and we grabbed him and hauled him into the surgery, and one of those spent shells had hit him right here, and had gone down and ripped his lung apart and killed him just like that.
Wow.
He bled to death just instantly. And I'm glad I wasn't standing about 2 feet over. We had all kinds of experiences like that. We finally captured.
Well, now I wanted to remember this. When you were in that minefield, when you packed up to go, didn't you tell me that you or one of your tent mates reached down and pulled up the stake?
And there was a mine right by our tent stake. And we've been walking right by that thing for, well, whatever period, maybe a week.
Now, was that
or more.
you that pulled it up, or was it somebody else?
We were taking our tent down. And you know, when we pulled that take out, there was this mine. So, of course, they came and got it out. But that really shakes you up, because we had knocked that stake down. We'd been standing there And how wide we didn't set that mine off, I have no idea.
Your hand.
But I have seen Jeeps blown up when they got on mines. I've seen graders. They had graders. They'd go in and they'd scrape these mines up, these personnel mines, and blow the grader wheels off. One of them went right up, came right down top of our tent, and made a great big hole in the tent. So we had to patch that up.
Can't remember if it's just
It was really comical, you know, tragic almost. Anyway, we finally slowly came out. We went through one town that is where they make these famous alabaster statues. You know, these horses and all these different things. They look like marble, but alabaster is softer than marble. And they do beautiful work. And you know, there was a whole mountain that was just alabaster. And their shops were right there part of the mountain, and they just keep going in deeper. And that was where they got the material to make those. Everybody went got some of these nice horses and stuff to send them home. They were all just junk by the time they got home, you know, dumped around on the ships and stuff. We got up to Florence, Italy, and that was supposed to be another city that was declared an open city because of the beautiful cathedrals and everything that was involved there. They had this one Ponte Vecchio bridge that was, it's one of the 8 wonders of the world. We walked across that several times. They had shops all along both sides of the bridge, you know. Jewelry shops and all kinds of shops right out across the Po River. Anyway, we went through Florence and we were going good, so we got right up, and we were going right up the mountain on the other side, and on the other side of the mountain was Bologna. And we got up just about to the top of the mountain, and we were getting prepared to make the big push to go over before winter. This was in November of 1944. I've told you about a year and a half of time. November of 1944. Well, we had a division that was over, the 92nd Infantry Division was over along the coast where the Tower of Pisa is. Then we had all the other divisions spaced out. We had also the British 8th Army that had joined with us, and we had all kinds of, and all colors of people there. We had blacks from South Africa, we had Indians from India, Australians, New Zealanders, Moroccans, all of those different soldiers were all part of the British 8th Army. And of course we had our own Japanese 442nd Division, or regiment, just a regiment. They weren't allowed to fight in the Pacific, but they wanted to show that they were good soldiers. And I can testify that they were the sharpest soldiers in the whole United States Army. Boy, they really showed that they were loyal to the United States. They were really good fighters, and we supported those guys. We had, when they came, they were 100th, they were called the 100th Battalion. It was just a battalion. But they had more casualties, more Purple Hearts than they had men in that battalion. And they'd come back and get patched up and go right back up if they weren't seriously injured. They were really good soldiers. But then more Japanese came over and we got a regiment. And they were really a fighting outfit. They wouldn't take, the Germans, they killed all of their Japanese prisoners right after they got started, and the word got around through this regiment. And they never took German prisoners. If the Germans, if they didn't get away, they were shot. They were no prisoners taken by the Japanese, because they had betrayed them, you know. So anyway, we got up on, just about on top of this mountain, and I think it was about the 10th of November, something like that. And the Germans apparently had good enough spies that they knew when our move was coming. And so a day before our move was coming, they took and put a big force over there and pushed that 92nd Division way back down the coastline. So we had to pull our 88th and our Japanese regiment and another division. I think it was the 3rd, if I remember right. That's the one that went into France a little later. And we had a 10th. We had the 10th Mountain Division too. We had to pull a lot of those guys out and all of our tanks out to go and plug the hole. Well, by the time we got that done and got them back in position, it started to snow. And it snowed, and it snowed, and we were up there in 6 feet of snow right on that mountain. So there was no way we were going to get our equipment up there to make that push until spring. So our outfit was the only hospital up there, and they said, we want 50 volunteers to stay just to take care of our guys that are out on patrols and keep the Germans from infiltrating and So I was one of the 50 that volunteered to stay up on that mountain that winter. And all the rest of our outfit went back to Florence, which was nice, fairly nice weather. There wasn't any snow in Florence, but up on that mountain it was just really heavy-duty snow.
Mhm.
And we lost quite a few soldiers up there that winter, but we held the mountain. We held the mountain. That was the winter I froze my feet, because we just had tents to sleep in.
Oh.
And anyway, spring finally got there. It was in April. And we got our forces all put together, and we got Mark Clark, the general, came up to see if we were all set with our blood bank and everything. And the way we started down to get the thing going, in about 2 or 3 days, we'd broken over the mountain and got the Germans on the run. And once we got down on the other side, they called back and they said, evacuate your patients and pack your tents. We're on the road. So away we went. We packed our tents, we evacuated all of our patients back to the station hospital down in Florence. And over the mountain we went, and there were dead guys all over the place about the mountain. You know, we just went right on past and on down and through Bologna. And they were still fighting in Bologna. We went right on through. We got through the main street. And the soldiers were chasing each other around into the buildings and behind the building, down the alleys, to, you know. We set up in a hospital on the other side of Bologna, about a mile or mile and a half. And the Germans had taken off and left their trenches, and all the guns were still left in the trenches. They took off. See, this was the beginning of the end. This was about the 15th or 17th of April, along in there. And so we set up and started receiving our patients, both German and American, of course, because we took all the wounded. On the 20th, the Germans surrendered. In the next 10 days, we had 600,000 German prisoners back in compounds all around us, all over the place.
Oh, wow.
And I'll tell you, feeding those guys and getting that food up there that quick was a job up over that mountain and so forth. So that was the end of the war in the Italian theater. Of course, the Italians had long before given up. They'd quit a long time before. They gave up right after we come into Italy.
Oh.
And Mussolini, I was there when Mussolini and his mistress were captured, and they strung them up by their heels in a town out just not too far from where we were. Took pictures of them and stoned them and so forth and so on. You know, it's a mess.
Mm-hmm.
So then, about the 8th of May, which is a couple of weeks later, the Belgian Bulge had been put back together again up in Europe, and the agreement of who was to get to a certain place in Berlin and the others to the Russians. We got there first. We had to stop until the Russians came up. But the 8th of May was the end of the war, 1945.
So you were 4 years.
You were still in Bologna when the war ended then, in Europe?
Bologna, yeah. And then we were transferred back. We went back into a resort town down between Florence and Rome. And it's where they had horse races and stuff during the summertime. So we set our tents right up out in the middle of this racetrack. And our job then, that summer, was to give shots to all of the soldiers that were going to go over to the Pacific Theater, because it wasn't over there.
Oh.
So we gave shots all summer. That's what our job was. And pretty soon we had all the soldiers who was going to go over to the Pacific Theater, all shot, and then they got 30 days in the United States for a furlough, and then they headed out. But our job was to pack up, get on a ship at Pisa, where the Leaning Tower was, to support, and we were going to go through the Panama Canal over the Pacific to help win that war. We were not going to get
So we
furloughed.
were actually fighting in two ends then?
Oh
at
yeah,
the
we
same
had the Pacific
times.
Theater going at the same time, yeah.
Oh.
And the Pacific War was a super big war too.
Uh-huh.
So we were really divided on that we got the job done. But anyway, we got the last done, and we packed up, and we got down to Pisa on about the 2nd of September, around there, 2nd or 3rd. And then we got word by radio that they had dropped the atomic bomb over on Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we were concerned because we wondered what was going to happen next. Some of the guys said, oh my gosh, we're going to have to go over to Japan to sit 2 or 3 years, or over the Pacific, because it won't have any ships to haul us all back home.
You
Anyway,
you
I had-
you
I
weren't
had-
on the ship yet when you got the word.
We were to get on the ship the next morning when we got the word. We got it that night, and the next morning we were just in our little pup tents that night. The next morning, we had no change in orders. We got on the ship. It was a great big ship. I think it was the Queen Elizabeth. It was one of the Queen ships. I think it was the Queen Elizabeth. And that was a pretty nice ship compared to what we had. We had about 3,000 or 4,000 troops on there. It's supposed to hold 1,500 people, you know.
Uh-huh.
And we got on that ship, and away we went through the Mediterranean, out past the Straits of Gibraltar, and headed for the Panama Canal. We got about halfway to the Panama Canal, and they got radio message that we were to go to the nearest port. The Japanese had surrendered. So we turned the course and went right into Newport News. We were probably one of the very first ships back to the United States with troops that had been in war. Then they didn't know what to do with us. They just didn't know at all what to do with us, because everything had been going out into war, and all at once they had to turn their deal around, and how do you get them done? So when we got, they decided they'd send us all to the place where we were inducted. So I got on a train after a few days there. I got on a train, and all the Western guys, and headed for Salt Lake City. Got there at Salt Lake City, and they didn't know what to do with it in Salt Lake either, because everything was, you know, putting them out. So they gave us the first furlough I had in 3 years. Was the furlough that I got when they didn't know what to do with it. So I got to go home for 2 weeks.
Oh.
So I went home, and I got.
Why wouldn't they send everybody home?
They didn't have any ships. My gosh, you got 5 or 6 or 8 million guys.
Yeah, but
over there.
the ones that got into the States.
Well, yeah, but you have to do the bookwork on you.
Oh.
You know what? You have to keep track of everything.
Yeah.
Everybody's got to have to keep track of it. So they sent us home for a couple of weeks to do, and then to get their bookkeeping turned around backwards and disengage instead of engage. You know. So I went home, and I've been going with Theo, and we've been writing letters.
Well,
So-
now is this when you walked? I want to hear this story too again. I want to get this on tape. Is this when you went home and nobody was home when you got there?
I got to Burley. I got that back. There was no way to get to Burley, and so I took a bus from Salt Lake. I took a bus to Burley, but I got there at about 4:30 in the morning. And I hadn't called anyone at Paul to, you know, earlier night. I got there about 2 o'clock in the morning. So it was right in the middle of the night. So I thought, well, I'm not going to stay around here all night, and I'm not going to wake the folks up, you know, not at this time of night. So I got my barracks bag, and I started walking home. It was only 5 miles. So I got down about to the river, and here come a guy in a Jeep, a GI, you know, in a Jeep. And he said, where are you heading? I said, I got to go to Paul. He said, climb in. So I went over to Paul, and I got there about 3 o'clock in the morning. And I went, the door was open, so I just went on in, and I thought, I'm not going to wake the folks up. So I just put my barracks bag down, and I just laid down on the davenport, went to bed, and here comes Lee. He'd been out on a date with Mary.
Oh.
And so we sat there and visited for a
Now,
few-
was he back from the war then too?
Well, Lee never went.
Oh, he never went.
He had this bad leg, you know.
Oh, that's right. That's
He was the only
right.
one of us that didn't go.
Yeah.
So we sat there and visited for a while. He told me that he and Mary were going to get married.
Oh.
And so then he went on up, went to bed, and I just stayed there and laid on the davenport. And about 6:30 or 7, the folks started getting up, or whenever they got 5 o'clock, they usually get up. They got up and they come out, and here I was, and they were really sore because I hadn't told them when I got home. See, and I'd been writing faithful letters every week. I'd write them a letter, you know. And Mom would write one back, so would Dad. So I don't know whether they ever did quite get over that. But anyway, that afternoon, I told Theo I thought I'd be home in 10 days, and it was right. I was. And so she came down on the bus, and she, I went over and met her on the bus. So we.
From where? She came from
She
where?
came from. She was working in Spokane, Washington,
Oh,
and she was working at a kind of an air base setup up there in Spokane. So she came down, and so we got reacquainted, and they, Lee and Mary were going to get married about 2 days later. So they said, why don't you just go to Salt Lake? So we went to Salt Lake, and they got married, and we got engaged.
Oh.
All during the same period of time. and she had to go back and go to work, and I had to go back and get discharged, so that's what happened. And then we decided we were going to get married in January. I got me a job at the sugar factory.
In
I
Salt
got-
Lake?
No, in Rupert.
Oh.
And I was going to get 78.5 cents an hour. And I figured I could save up a little money. I had some money saved, but I wanted to save it to buy a car. Because I didn't have any transportation. I'd never had a car, and I was 25 years old.
Listen to that. Grandpa was 25 and he didn't have a car.
Yeah.
But how can you buy a car with 78 cents an
Well,
hour?
I had saved my money all during the time I was in the war. I got high wages in the Army. I got $120 a month because I got overseas pay.
That's why everybody wanted to go overseas, huh?
I guess. But you got a little extra bonus if you were overseas. You know. Anyway, I had saved up about $1,400 or $1,500.
Those days, that was a lot
That was
of
a lot of
money.
money. Well, I put my name in for a car, but didn't have any cars to sell. And
They
so
didn't make
that
cars
was
during the war.
during the war. They hadn't made any cars for 4 or 5 years. They had made all into Army stuff. You know,
Oh.
trucks and Army
Nobody
vehicles.
was buying cars.
So the only cars were available were cars that had been made before 1941.
Mm.
So anyway, we got married in November. It got set up a little bit, but we got married in November. And I worked for the chicken hatchery there at Paul. Got $35 a week. Well, I worked for Dad in the store until the chicken hatchery opened, and then about the 1st of January, I worked for chicken hatchery and got $35 a week.
Now, was that a Merrill hatchery then?
Yeah, my uncle had it.
Oh.
Much smaller, different kind of a setup than it is now by a long shot.
That was Lloyd's dad.
Lloyd's dad. And I worked there during that season, and in that summer, I got word that they needed somebody up there to run a chicken hatchery in Wenatchee, Washington. We finally got an apartment, which was, the whole apartment was about as big as probably our family room in there, and maybe half of our dining area. That was the whole apartment. The bathroom was down the hall.
That was the
$25 a month. But for $35 a week income, that was fair.
big expense.
Anyway, we went up and saw these people and decided we would take that job up there, and I was going to get $300 a month to run that chicken hatchery. And so we moved up to Wenatchee, Washington, and ran that chicken hatchery for a year. And then I got a telephone call, and the University of Idaho said, our extension poultryman is going to retire, and we want you to come and be our new extension poultryman and train with him for a year or two until he retires, and then you'll be the new poultry extensionman. Here I was 26 years old, the youngest that they'd ever hired, and the only one they ever in their life hired by telephone, I'm sure. So we moved back the following July to Boise, Idaho. And I started working for the University Extension Service, which I did for 6.5 years. In the meantime, I'd gone all over the state. My job was to go all over the state and inspect. We had 39 chicken hatcheries in Idaho. About 10,000 farmers had chickens of one sort or another, all were on their farms. And my job was to help the county agents help these people with their problems. They had lots of
So you were gone quite a bit then.
half the time, nearly half.
Now, what year was that you were hired by the state?
I was hired, let's see, I got back in 1947. Hired in 1947 to be at the university. I'd gone up to Wenatchee in 1946. I'll back up. My name finally came up on the list in May to get a car, so I got a 1946 four-door blue Chevrolet for $1,350. Deluxe.
And you paid cash for it.
And I paid cash for it.
Were they shocked?
What,
That you paid cash for it?
no, I had to put $100 down right up front. So I'd give them another $1,250, no sales tax then.
Oh.
And I had a car, didn't have any payments, you see. Anyway, that was our transportation. It was my transportation almost all the time I was in the extension service. And then in 1951, I traded it in on a 1951 Ford two-door, which I paid $1,950 for, but I got $1,150 for that car, trade-in, because used cars were still valuable. But my friend that I went to school with was working for the governor up there in his automobile agency in Grangeville. So I bought that car in Grangeville.
Ah.
A friend that I knew in college, you know.
Uh-huh.
And so then I decided that that wasn't a very good lifestyle. I was gone half the time, and we had 2 little kids. That was Kathy and Galen. So we looked all over, and we didn't have any money. I made $350 a month in the extension service, and we got 5 cents a mile for travel, and $25 a week when we were out on the road, and that was to buy us a hotel room
And food.
food for a week. $25. That was our allotment. Well, I went without quite a few meals, and I could save $2 or $3 out of that 25 by not eating 3 meals a day. But we didn't have very much money, and I decided that we better find us a place. So one of my friends in Boise was just new in the real estate business, and he ran upon this little place out here that we bought. And we
Now,
could get,
how many acres
it was 5 acres at the time.
at that time?
Yeah, it's where the house was right out in front of out where the mailbox is, right there,
Mm-hmm.
and over a little farther, in front of the pump house out in that area.
Mm-hmm.
There's an old farmhouse and an old barn out here, and so we could get it for $2,000 down, but all we lacked was $2,000. So I borrowed $2,000 from Dad
Uh-huh.
and paid it down, and that was all money we had, was the $2,000. So I worked for the extension service for a year, and in the meantime, we bought 1,000 baby chicks, and I built that where our service room is now, and right straight back, that was the first building right there. And I quit my job the following fall when the birds started laying eggs with 1,000 chickens. Now that was about the most foolish thing I could have done, but it worked. And I don't know how we ever managed it. We got 33 cents a dozen for eggs that first year, or during that period of time when our birds first came in. We got 33 cents a dozen for our eggs.
Huh.
And we had to live on that. So we didn't have any profit. We were losing money like mad. But Mr. Long up at Eagle was the guy that ran the feed mill. And I guess he felt kindly toward us, and he said, I talked to him, and he said, well, I'll help you with your feed bill. Well, it got higher and higher, because we weren't making enough to pay the feed bill and buy our groceries. And we had payments to make on the place, and we had buildings to build. I don't know how we survived it, but anyway, we just plugged along, you know. We didn't go anywhere, didn't buy any clothes, didn't do anything. And we slowly got a little bit more and remodeled the old barn, you know. I went and made some deals on lumber. I bought some lumber for $10, 1,000 square feet, and I bought a little old 46 International pickup, and so I used that to haul the lumber a little bit at a time out and build our own building. But we got so we could continue to build a little bit, and we got a few more chickens, a few more until we had a couple thousand chickens, you know. Price of eggs got a little bit better. We started. We got at that time everybody wanted every kind of egg, every kind of chicken you can imagine. They wanted ostrich whites, and they wanted Rhode Island Reds, and they wanted white Leghorns, and they wanted New Hampshire Reds, and so they wanted a little of everything. So we got into the producing hatching eggs for Lynch Brothers Hatchery over at Nampa. And that gave us a little bit. We got 70 cents a dozen for those eggs, you know, but we had to raise the roosters. So we did that. We were kind of getting started in that, and we finally decided that if we were going to ever have any more family, we better get going. We just didn't decide. We had decided we just couldn't have a family any bigger than the one we had, because we just were having a hard time feeding the ones we had, you know. So we decided we were going to have Kirk. So we decided that in October, and the next July he was born. And from that point on, Theo wasn't feeling very good. She started having headaches.
That was before she was pregnant, or?
Oh no, that was after Kirk was born.
Oh, after.
Yeah. So we went into the doctor, and about October, she had these headaches, and her scalp would just be hurting all the time, and some of her hair started coming out a little bit, you know. And his doctor, he just didn't tumble on what it was, and so he sent us to a specialist, and the specialist says, well, you know, it could be leukemia or something, but he didn't know, and we just went along like that. And then about December or January, she got losing all of her strength, you know, she wasn't strong.
So he said that it could be leukemia, but that was about it. No blood.
Well,
test
he
or
didn't
nothing?
do any tests or anything. He gave her some medicine to take. Thought that maybe that'd cure her, I guess. I should have been more on it myself, but she was out helping me in the farm, and I didn't have any suspect that she had that kind of a problem. That's very rare in a person that's 30 years old. Anyway, by January, she started bleeding heavily, you know, certain periods of time during the month, and so we went back in to see the doctor, and I insisted that we take some blood tests. So we took some blood tests. Now this was in February, I guess. It was just before she died. So we went in March, and it was the first time we could see where we were making enough money that we were making more than we had, and then we needed to just pay our current bills, and it looked like we could start paying back. We went in and bought her a new dress and a few things like that on a Monday, and got the blood tests. I don't know how come we got them, but we went up to the lab and got the blood tests, and took them.
Oh, it was after you had bought the dress for her.
Yeah.
Oh.
And we went over to see and showed it to the doctor, and when I looked at that blood test, I knew what the problem was, I think. And I told him, I says, hey, her white cells are just all screwed up, because I had been a lab technician, you know, I knew. And so we took her to, she started bleeding all over in her skin by Tuesday, and took her in the hospital Wednesday, and she died the next morning. That was fast. So anyway, I had 3 little kids. One was 8 months old, that was Kirk, or 7, something like that. It was the middle of March when she died, and he was born in, so he was 8 months old. And I didn't know how I was going to handle that project, but after about a week, I finally decided that there was nobody that was going to handle it except me, and I better get on it. So I went up to the bank, first time I'd ever borrowed any money, and I said, I've got to have some money, so they loaned me $3,500. So I could build out there where number 1 is now, only it was behind number 1. It's more where number 2 is. And I started building that building, and I just built it up to the square. Didn't have any more money, that's all money I had. So I built it up to the square, and finally got a roof over it, put some chickens in there. And all the elders wanted to come out and help me, and I said, oh, I'm independent, I don't want to have you guys help me out, you know. And I was just working 7 days a week, you know. I was putting eggs and counting eggs at night while the kids were asleep, because I couldn't do it in the daytime. I was lucky to get the egg and the chickens fed and stuff in the daytime and build the buildings, you know. So I was busy, and Marguerite was up in Moscow, and she was working for a doctor up there, and she'd come down on a weekend about once a month or something like that. She'd fly down on the plane for $25.
So who would watch Kirk while you were outside working?
Well, I had a girl that had got married when she was a junior in high school, and I paid her $3 a day to come and babysit Kirk, and the kids were in school. And then I'd do the washing and the food feeding and stuff like that. She didn't know too much about doing that because she's only 16, but and the guy she married was only 17. But he was finishing his high school, see. They were nice kids. So she was babysitting, and then in the summertime I had Maxine Marshall come and babysit all day long, and she'd help. She was a good worker too. So I got by on that kind of a project. And so about a year later, then Beverly and I got together. We've told you that story already, but through this mutual friend, we got together, and by August or last of July, we decided we were going to get married. And so then I had somebody take care of the kids and the wife besides, you see.
And a good keeper.
So that's kind of a.
Well, you really came ahead on that one, didn't you?
Yeah, I come out okay.
Yeah.
You just never give up. That's the idea. So anyway, that was kind of the way it got started. So we have had to actually build this thing in the profit area from about that point of time on. We were able to make a little profit, enough for me to go down to Utah a couple of times to see Beverly. Had enough money to do that out of it, and that's about the size of it. Didn't have anything in the bank, but we had a nice big bill over to Mr. Long, like about $10,000 worth. And with the amount of volume we had, that was a huge debt. Besides, we had to pay for the farm. See,
We had about $20,000 debt when we were.
well, we had to. We paid.
And you guys got married?
We had bought the farm for $10,000. We paid
The
$2,000.
5 acres?
Yeah, and the house.
Ouch, they're
But
ouch.
the thing of it was that a month after we'd moved out here, the highway department came and said, we're going to have to move your house back. We're putting a new highway right where your house is.
Oh.
I had just dug a septic tank in this rocks by hand, put it about 6 feet or 6.5 feet deep, and bought the septic tank and put it in and covered it up. Went over to a meeting in Caldwell, and Theo called me and she says, you won't believe this, but the highway department is going to move our house back. And here I had just put that. I had no idea when we bought this place, and that's why we got it for $10,000,
Oh.
because those people wanted to leave. See,
They knew.
so that's that part of the story. And from then on, you've got it filled in up to the next place.
And after we were married, we took the $5,000 that I had insurance from Justice death and used it to build another chicken house.
Oh.
And that plus the $3,500 that we borrowed, kind of got our breath. You see, got to start going. So that was just a little start, but it was an important turnaround.
Mr. Long used to come down to collect money periodically, and oh, we just felt like crawling under the table. We didn't have much money. We'd give him all we had, and then we'd wonder what we were going to eat on for the next little while. But we paid our tithing,
Yeah.
and we made it. And everything we had extra, we put back in the business. We took only what we had to have to live on, and put everything else back in the business and build it up. That's why we're where we are today.
Yeah.
And that's why the kids are where they are today too, because of your
Yeah.
you sacrificing, you know.
Well, we didn't have a choice. It was either sacrifice or go under.
Yeah.
We decided it was better to sacrifice.
And then we'd buy a few more acres of land. We bought some from Len Burnham and then from Mrs. Ellsworth that lived back there.
So how many acres do you have here now?
We had 60. We
Now?
ended up with 60.
Now?
Well, we sold Farron 4 acres
Oh.
for his house.
So
And then Galen, we sold him a little bit more. We bought the Burnham property, and Farron wanted to have this pasture go with the farm. He was quite insistent about that, and of course Galen didn't have enough money to pay Burnham for all of it anyway. So he took just the Burnham house, and so then we adjusted that a little bit and sold Galen enough from the farm to give him an acre of ground. So his house sits on an acre of ground. Ours sits on about an acre and a half, because we own where this house is, the swimming pool, and that little centerpiece. We own that. All the rest of it we incorporated in the farm.
See, Galen's property goes back, includes his shop behind his house.
And comes over about halfway to the swimming pool.
And
Well, that's